Everybody, it is Thursday, October 13th. This is a special meeting of the Curriculum Committee of the Darien Board of Education. We have a couple great things on our agenda today. We are going to start with an art department update and move on to the selection of instructional materials. So I will start by turning it over to Dr. Chamberg first.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you to Jacqueline Samus. She is our art department coordinator, K through 12. In our continued series of program updates and department updates, art is up next. We did not get to art last spring, so we're excited to hear from Jacqueline this morning. So I will turn it over.
Good morning, Jacqueline.
Thank you for having us. So we're going to start. I like to start with the good news things. So we had Sarah Jackson won the national winner for the Jim Himes Congressional Award. She was selected to show up at his office in Bridgeport and then went down to the Capitol and was there for about 6 months. She was very sad that she didn't get to go down to see her work in DC, but because it was closed, but her work went there for about 6 months. That was our first round of good news, and our second round of good news is back in July. We had a first and second place winner at the I3 art show. Charlotte Cochran won first place, and Thomas Bivens graduated, won second place. This is an amazing art show. It's my favorite that we
Thank you. That we do all year because it has every student who enters the art show gets to be in the digital version of it. So there are about 40 to 50 pieces that hang in the actual gallery at the Bruce Museum. But if you enter it, you get in. So this year there were 875 students who entered the art show and only 45 that showed in the gallery. And somebody did the math and said it's harder to get into iCreate than it is to get into an Ivy League school percentage wise, which I just love. Anyways, we got a first and second place there. Our kind of where we're at right now in our curriculum process is, we pull from kind of our mission statement that we start off every year with, just that we offer an emotionally safe and stimulating learning environment based in the fine art studio model, where students can experience the joy of individual creativity, experience with media, techniques and processes, and develop a more in-depth understanding of the arts. We're a very hands-on studio program. We love to just let students get in and just start working, see where they're at, and then develop their skills from there. So everybody gets to start, everybody has their own starting point and their own ending point, and we like to grow and work with each student individually. We're based off our national art standards, or the standards that we're using to develop our curriculum and what we are working with. So it's about creating, presenting, responding, and connecting. The kind of the process that every student uses, K through 12, is the thinking is our brainstorming. That's where we're going to start, collaborating with peers, talking about our ideas, refining our process, and then actually making it and taking a step back, reflecting. Sometimes that happens in the middle of the process. Sometimes that happens at the end. And then with every project, that's kind of just our stages that we go through. Sorry, just take some water. So where we're at in our actual curriculum review and using the new platform is we're still at the beginning of it. We are still kind of gathering our materials, working from our old paper curriculum, and then we're going to this year spend a lot of time updating the new platform and putting our materials online that way. So we'll spend the spring PD days working on, winter and spring working on that. Instructional time. So elementary students have art 1 time per rotation. It's about 30 rotations in the school year. And then they have those 9 kind of extra art periods that happen throughout the school year. So for a total of almost 40 class meetings per year. At the middle school, we do have art in the 6th grade 1 time per week for the entire school year. And in 7th and 8th grade, it's for 1 quarter, which is about 36 class periods. Art attracts a wide variety of students, from our amazing athletes and rock star, captains of lacrosse team are taking art classes. And then, our classrooms are very diverse in that way, that we have a lot of different types of learners that are taking them. I think art is a great equalizer where students maybe that struggle in other learning or academic settings, can be absolutely amazing in the arts, and students just love getting their hands into it. And especially our clay classes are very popular. It's very physical material at the high school, and students just love working in that, getting dirty. So we talk a lot about social emotional learning as our initiatives. Our K-5 5 students here. This is the students, kindergartners that were working on dry erase boards. So the idea that art isn't always permanent. Art isn't always something that's going to end up hanging up on a wall or hanging up on your refrigerator, that you're going to make something and then we're going to erase it. We're going to do it again. And we're going to try something new. So just getting over that feeling that it has to be perfect that first time. So they're doing blind contour line drawings where they cover their dry erase board with paper plates. They actually can't see what's happening and just really get to look at their subjects and analyze what it is they're trying to create and making that happen on the paper. I'm stressing that there isn't always a right answer, and just to enjoy the experience of making. 7th grade, oh, there's something you're supposed to be able to click from there. All right, so in 7th grade, I wish that didn't translate, it's okay. Miss Morgan in her classroom is doing a little mood meter where they're going to come in every day. They're going to pick where they're at the mood meter, and then they have to create a drawing using that mood and an object that she's giving them. So some of the examples that we had were pears, and they have to draw the pear, but then incorporate where they're at in their mood meter on that. In their pear. So it was a peavy pear was my example, and an angry cup of coffee, a enthusiastic lamp were some of just the examples that students had. So just kind of thinking about where they're at in their own art process, and if they're coming in one place, kind of realizing that their own experience in the art room is going to be affected by that feeling or that mood for the day. Oh, I had to click the next button. Somebody, it's my first time working with one of these. So can we actually click on no, to see those examples? There's no way. If you thought it was access to anybody with the link. If you click right on the mood meter itself is the, yes. Maybe. Oh, yes. Okay. So there, second slide down is our PV pairs or tired pairs. Okay. So, and then pumpkins was the next one. So we had a hyper pumpkin. Chickens were the subjects, a chill chicken. So these are just little kind of 5-minute warm-up activities that students get to do at the beginning of class, get them thinking in their kind of artistic brain, sketch out a little bit before they jump into their projects. And we have our ghosts. So you're seeing a lot of different solutions to the same prompt from these students. All right, and then back. Thank you, Michelle. Here we go. All right, so some highlights from the elementary. So with Hispanic Heritage Month, students that were studying Miro, they watched this lovely video about talking about his process with line and shape and form and color. And then students were all given the same prompts kind of every day that they had to work from, but then you can see all their different solutions to the same prompt. So the first day was draw 2 lines across the paper, and then they had to have the shapes and the patterns and the form, and kind of building them upon those. So that was happening. This is 5th grade at Tokenique. Kindergartners, we really start off with just thinking about line and how they're using their materials. So they were doing some collaborative drawings on large pieces of paper. It's nice that we're all getting back and close together again and working collaboratively on these large drawings. You can see a whole class working on about a 10-foot piece of paper there. And then we're going to move on to our middle school. So 6th grade is working on Zentangles. The 6th grade does a lot of, thinking about line at the start of the school year, designing inside their subject or outside their subjects. And then their class Zentangle that they're working on. These kind of class community projects happen at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, where they are going to always have something that builds upon whatever they're doing on their personal project. And then it's the reward, not to finish first and kind of get to work on the class project, but to come up with something that's individual and unique and new for your class. And then you get to add your kind of piece to that class project. So if they were coming and came up with their own fully original Zentangle marker value, they got to add that to the class project that is the lower right corner. 7th and 8th grade does this with other materials and collage projects. You see those hanging around the school as you're going around the middle school. But the Zentangle will hang somewhere when it's done. But it's kind of a nice reward for those students who have finished and have come up with something that is completely unique in their own. Our 7th grade, we're doing some architectural and perspective drawings where they had to design a new community space that doesn't exist in Darien. And then they had to think about who is it for, what is the access to it, what is its purpose, and depending on which the clientele for who it's for might determine, if it's for kids, then there might be bike parking racks there, or does it have to be then walkable from different schools or the center of town, or if it's a big field space, where is that going to fall into our community? Designing then the building that is existing, the layout of the entire park space. So we're looking at the roller skating rink that we don't have, I don't have yet, maybe. And then where are they going to park? And then the perspective drawing of the top one had a new park space with this tree house. This is all done by 8th graders this fall, sorry. All right, then some highlights of what we start working on at the high school with our Ceramics 1 classes. There are 8 sections of Ceramics 1, so a lot of kids are working on this project with these themed boxes. So you have to pick your own theme, think about designing it in the round. Every side's gonna have its own original image, and then they're learning just those basic skills with clay of scoring and slipping and attaching 2 pieces of clay together, making it functional with this lid piece. So they're still getting those into the glaze kiln now. And then lastly, here's our drawing and painting 1 students are working on impressionism and kind of thinking about lights, light value, color, and then capturing a landscape space. And those they've just finished up last week. So that is all I have for our curriculum updates.
Thank you, Mrs. Samus. I appreciate that. A quick question about at the high school level. Do you see that more students are gravitating towards the arts? You talk so much about the mental health of our students and the art being a very safe space and, maybe not as stressful as, the reading, writing, arithmetic. Are you seeing more interest?
If I tracked our numbers of our enrollment over the last 5 years, I'd have to pull up that spreadsheet, but I believe we're about 100 students over and 100 students more currently this school year than we were 5 years ago. So sometimes that number is going to fluctuate, and my 1 year might be 25 over from where we were 5 years ago, but this year, based off of kind of the whole projection, I think we're about 100 students more. I think students gravitate towards the experience in the classroom and just that classroom culture and environment that's created. So even if they're not the most talented artists, they really just like being in that space. And that is a goal that all of our teachers have and that we talk a lot about, of making every student feel known and valued in that classroom. It's a great opportunity to actually get to talk with the students. We talk a lot as they're working, because it's just a different environment. We're not lecturing. It's not us directing it. So moving around and really getting to know those students, we know their interests, we know what they're doing on the weekends, we know what's happening at their home, that they got to talk, those little anecdotal things we can ask them about. That I think that is a culture that attracts the students to the classroom.
Thank you for creating that. Yes. Other questions?
Thanks, this is amazing. I can't believe those were done since the school year started.
Yes.
And I think I need to find an adult art class because
Yes.
I need this kind of
Yes.
outlet.
It's
Coloring books
the
just
block
aren't cutting it.
schedule helps us so much. Just anecdotally, we love working in the block
Good.
because the hour and 20 minutes just is an amazing time where you can really get into your project, get focused on your project, take time to step back and look at what you're doing, put it up, and then get back in and keep working. So that revision and the analyzing what's happening is happening right there in the moment, and then they're able to keep working, as opposed to I'm coming in, I'm looking at it, I'm working it, I'm cleaning up, and then I have to, a whole day before I get back to it.
That's
Again.
great. That's good to know.
Yes.
With all that interest
Yes.
and all our students,
Yes.
are there enough classes or people? I feel like anecdotally, I used to hear that ceramics was so hard to get into. Like, do we have enough sections of
So
these?
I hear that too. And I think the students create that buzz. I don't know who's creating that buzz. I believe every student that wants to get into it is able to. There have been years where we've had 8 sections of Ceramics 1, which means it's offered every period of the day, over both days of the block. So there was always a spot. If for students who aren't able to get into it, it's usually because of other classes that they're taking. At the higher level classes, I feel is where the challenge happens, because if they are in that French 5 class that is only offered during period 2 and AP drawing painting is only offered during period 2, then they have to make a choice. But for our entry level classes, students, I believe, are getting all their first picks. I'm not hearing of anybody come back saying I couldn't get into such and such a class.
That's great.
So I think we are offering enough classes. I also love the support that we still get for our advanced level classes that do tend to have smaller numbers than our entry level classes, and that those classes are still running for those kids.
And do we have a few AP art classes?
We have
And photography?
5 AP art sections running right now. We have one section of AP 2D design, but it's through the photography avenue. We have 2 sections of AP ceramics, which is AP 3D design is the exam they're taking. And we have 2 sections of AP drawing and painting, which is either 2D or drawing exam, depending.
Thank you.
56 different sections in total.
Robust. Thank you.
Yes.
Sounds amazing.
So I'm curious if there's anything that you think K to 12, is there something that you would like to change? Is there something you would like to revise? Where do you think, going forward, your focus will be?
My primary focus right now is just getting all the great stuff that we are doing, that each teacher is doing, documented and into this new program, so that all teachers can access what's happening in the other, especially at the elementary levels, because there are 5 different buildings. So they can help and use each other as those resources and collaborate on lesson plans together that way. Is there something that we need? I would love to see the elementary schedule go back to the hour-long classes for maybe just the 3 through 5 sections. I think that is a place where those students could use a longer block of time. But that's what I'm hearing from my teachers is what they would like, but they also understand the way the whole school operates. This is not what we're dealing with, and they still get the same amount of contact time with the students with those extra classes. So they make that work.
And in terms of the elementary art classes, I assume and I hope that all 5 teachers are working together. Do they do the same project? Like, is it the first unit of kindergarten is the same and everything? Or do the teachers have the autonomy to choose within a certain?
They all do something that's very similar just because of the progression of how it makes sense for working with students and their development and their fine motor skills. They don't do identical projects necessarily, but they all have the same experience. So every 5th grader is going to get a printmaking unit. Every kindergartner is going to deal with line is to start, and then they're going to deal with color and mixing color. They love to share and collaborate on different projects and kind of steal each other's resources in a good way. So they end up doing a lot of the same stuff, but it's never going to look the same because each teacher brings their own spin to it as well. But they are walking into 6th grade confidently, and the 6th grade teacher knows exactly what skills every student, every elementary school has had and experiences that they've had.
So when they get to 6th grade, they have all had the same.
Excellent. Same skills, same concepts, and just with each teacher's little twist.
Thank you. Further questions about art? No?
No, my only comment would be, which doesn't really have to do with you specifically, would be that because that ceramics thing comes up every year, that kids have this, I can't get in, I can't get in, I can't get in. So during that orientation in 8th grade, when they should tell kids, by the way, we just make more sections.
Yeah. Every year it happens. So I will talk to the school counselors down at middle school and make sure that everybody knows, because again,
Get the word out.
if 200 students sign up for it, we will have 200 sections, not 200, we'll have enough spots, because that means we don't have as many digital photography sections. So we have the teachers and we have the space.
Right.
And we have the amazing kilns to make
It's
it
just
all.
unnecessary stress.
It
they put
is
on
unnecessary
themselves,
stress.
and it's silly every year.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Appreciate your
That was
time.
awesome. Thanks, Jacqueline.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to recognize her, Jacqueline, just for, she's one of the leaders who are K through 12. And the nature of the discipline itself, the creative nature of that is also reflected in her leadership, and the talent of the kids and the talent of our students. And it's just a phenomenal option for students to pursue. And appreciative of the board support, the community support of the arts as we continue to move forward with this. We have the right people in place and the right programs, and I just want to recognize her leadership. Thank you.
I will add just one more thing, that we do feel that support from the board, from the town. We have everything that we need. I know with budget season coming, we're starting to think about that. I mean, the resources that we have access to is amazing. And every year we keep getting it, and it's great because the students get to make wonderful pieces with fine quality materials. So, all right.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Dr.
Thank you very
Chandler.
much.
We will move on to our second agenda item.
Thank you. So this agenda item focuses on the selection of instructional materials. The first few slides will look repetitive because they're really taken from the presentation that I gave to the full board in September of last year. And then we dig deeper into some explanation of those things. So we will always make that connection to our mission and vision because that is why we do what we do. And the three main gears that turn curriculum are the standards and frameworks that exist for every content area, our vision of the graduate, which we have built into our EduPlanet platform, and we'll make those connections K to 12, and our district strategic plan. This is our curriculum development cycle. It's always important to point out that Darian's approach to curriculum revision is, we call it a responsive process. So we respond in real time to changes in needs, which means we reflect every year. There's not a moment in time where we look at all English at the same time and do an audit, so to speak. So we're always in a process of inquiry related to where the units stand. Interestingly, the NEASC visit happened this week at the high school. And one of the questions I got as a follow-up from the committee was, can you talk to me about your curriculum process? Because we're not clear. And as I've said many times, this responsive approach is not a typical approach. So I explained it, and they were very intrigued and interested. So I'm excited to see what they say about it. But the two big pieces that they commented on were reviewing the curriculum with administration and just changes in general to make sure that we're closing the loop. So we don't have curriculum people and teachers working on something and the administrators aren't aware of what the changes actually are. And they're really not changes as much as I tend to classify them as updates. So today, Julie Droller, Director of Elementary Education, Francis is our Director of English 612, our department chair, and Keith, our department chair for Social Studies 612. They all have a chunk. There might be questions throughout, so this might make more sense to ask questions as each person is going because it might be too much to go back 8 slides and ask a question about that. So this is also the instructional resources piece of, I know we often call everything curriculum, and in my mind as a curriculum administrator, curriculum very much means the written, the taught, and the assessed. So I think of that as the actual content, not the big picture of teaching and learning. So we talked about this a bit last year. And then instructional resources. In our units of study, as we're working on the next generation of revision, we want anything that's a guaranteed experience that all students will read or interact with, no matter who the teacher is in any school, to live within the units. And then there's always those, I called them secondary sources last year. Being cautious of that term today because Mr. Keeler is going to talk about primary sources in the context of social studies curriculum, and it means something a little bit different. But when I'm saying secondary, I mean that things happen and in real time, because we're responsive, we might include those. And Mr. Keeler will talk about that as well. So we'll start with Mrs. Droller.
So good morning, everybody. Oh, can you hear me? At the elementary level, our guaranteed experiences would be our whole class read alouds. And they primarily come from the texts that are aligned with our Teachers College reading and writing units of study. So they are selected by Teachers College. Their process for selection is very similar to ours. They rely on trusted resources, American Library Association, publishers, award winners, Kirkus Book Review, Horn Book Review, New York Times Book Review, all of those like Caldecott, Newbery, all of those award winners. And of course, for the read alouds, they are books that support the goals of the unit. So whatever reading or writing strategies, those would be texts where they really pop out. They're also generally for whole class read alouds, a little bit lower level because that's what the teacher is modeling and demonstrating. And when I talk about independent reading, you'll see the transfer. For our content area and our social emotional learning, those books are chosen by our curriculum teams and really heavily guided by our library media specialists who are our experts in choosing books from all of those resources. All of them also are vetted by communities. In Teachers College, they have communities that read and review their books and field test them in classrooms. With us, the same thing. Our committees read and review those books. So those are our guaranteed experiences for for teaching, for modeling, for teachers thinking aloud and fostering class discourse, and then books for independent partner reading and book clubs, chosen the same way. Some of them are purchased by central office, some of them are purchased by individual buildings. We purchased, Teachers College put together classroom library sets where they had a variety of genres, reading levels, interests to support the units of study. So those were purchased. We purchase award-winning texts, new books that are coming out. We're focusing now, as is Teachers College, on authorship in our books and wanting the books in our classroom libraries to be windows and mirrors. So where students see themselves in their lives and also learn about others in the world. So that is primarily where we get our resources from. And talking about the responsive curriculum, this is just one example of a unit that was developed based on feedback. Every June, we have what we call June feedback meetings, and we meet with teachers and we get feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what we need. So in 5th grade, there was a need for a social issues book club unit in reading. We had one in 3rd, 4th, and 6th grade. It was missing in 5th grade. We have an interpretation unit in the beginning of the year, but we were really missing something mid-year. So teachers identified that need. We established a plan for collaboration led by our TC staff developers so that all 5th grade teachers in the district, in all 5 schools, could participate in the development, but also professional development in content and instructional methods. So we determine our goals, what reading standards, we have vision of the graduate learning outcomes as part of that unit. We developed the curriculum together, teachers field tested it. We really did it across a few months where teachers tried something, came back, we made tweaks. We selected a shared read aloud, shared experience. We used a text called Front Desk by Kelly Yang about a Chinese immigrant that our students were reading. It's part of a trilogy, but they were reading it like very quickly and kind of passively and not doing the kind of work that we wanted them to do. So we used that so teachers could model think aloud strategies and also some note-taking strategies for kids. Really, really effective and engaging unit. And then we selected curated text, again, leaning on our library media specialists to appeal to a variety of interests and abilities of the kids in our class. So that was a really successful unit.
Yes, we're talking about elementary. So I just have a few quick questions. You were talked about the shared a whole class read aloud. So does that mean, similar to what I asked Jacqueline, does kindergarten read the same, all 22 sections of kindergarten read the same read aloud in September? So every child is having that shared experience across the district, or is it chosen at the school level?
Generally, it is across the district. Teachers can make tweaks if they want to, if they have a newer book. Sometimes there's something great that comes out that one teacher will be passionate about, and they generally share. So some of them are provided, but we don't say this is the only book that you can use because the world of children's publishing is so vast and
it
changing
moves so quickly.
Mhm.
So that was also, behind my question was how much is prescribed for the teachers and how much autonomy do the classroom teachers have? Because there is, at the elementary level, there are just so many options and there's so many new things. And so I like to hear that the teachers are
and
taking a little
so many
leeway.
books can provide the same purpose.
Right.
So absolutely, teachers have choice.
Just a theme that will tie into that question is we try to send the message that we don't teach books. So a book is selected in order for students to develop very specific skills. So when we talk about a book, to us, that's not talking about the curriculum, it's talking about a resource we use. And we try to turn the conversation to, well, what do we actually expect students to learn as a result of interacting with this content? So that theme will continue.
Could you just talk a little to when you talk about the 5th grade reading unit of social issues book club, just a couple examples of some social issues that are covered. I think you said the other grades have them as well, just to dimensionalize for us.
Sure. In fifth grade, we talk about immigration, we talk about fairness, we talk about power, friendship, family, being inclusive, empathy.
Thank you.
Questions of elementary? No? I had one more, but I don't remember what it was. We'll come back.
And we'll move on to Mr. Janesco.
Okay, thank you. Well, and these first two slides are going to have some overlap with what Julie just spoke about in terms of classroom libraries and book club units. I will just say in terms of selecting our books for our classroom libraries at the middle school, so just like in elementary classes, teachers' classrooms are equipped with a multitude of books that are typically arranged by genre, and that's done to support our independent reading requirements at the middle school, 6 through 8. And the books that we find in those libraries, this may be surprising, maybe not, but a great number of them have just been handed down by teachers over the years, and you can tell the difference between them for sure. But we also, just like we do at the elementary level, will make purchases of what Heinemann calls shelves, which are curated by Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. And it might come with 35 books that are meant to augment the study of a given genre, and those will be in the classroom as well. Certainly, we try to pay attention to what kids are reading, and if they have books that are popular that are not on our shelves, we will keep our eye on that, and we'll add that to our list of potential books that we'll purchase for our classroom libraries. We also get feedback from our librarians, and we will, just as Julie said, we'll look at award-winning texts, and we'll augment the books that kids have in the classroom libraries through those means. Now, for the independent books, the students are expected to have one at all times. They're doing a reading log that follows their work in those books. They don't have to choose a book from the classroom library. They could choose one from the town library. They could choose one that they have at home, but we're just giving them a resource to augment their independent reading. If we could go to the next slide. So just like at the elementary level, we have book club units. We have them at the high school as well, but predominantly when we talk about book club units, we're talking about the middle school. At the middle school, most of our book club units are focused on a genre. So for example, memoir or nonfiction or mystery or dystopian novels. Those are some of the genres we study at the middle school through book clubs. Typically, the way we do things is that we'll use the books curated by Teachers College Reading and Writing Project as the books that we'll start with for the students' options for those book club selections. And over time, once we've implemented those units at a year or a couple years in, teachers and sometimes librarians will offer some other books that will extend our learning of that genre, and we will have conversations about them and oftentimes make those purchases. So, a book club unit 3 years in will have maybe a few books that were curated by Teachers College and a few that we added to round out that unit. I will just pause for a minute and say that we have replaced books at the middle school unit, at the middle school level for book clubs when we have deemed some of the books that may have come from Teachers College as maybe having content that was maybe the mature content outweighed the value of those books. So we have done those replacements. And I should even add, at the middle school level, we have replaced summer reading, where for a variety of reasons, we felt that a given selection was inappropriate for a given year, and we have done that as well. So I just want to make it clear that at the secondary level, we do intervene and make these kind of choices along the way. I'm going to move along to the high school, and which is sort of the land of the whole class novel.
Can I just interrupt for a second
Sure.
and ask a question about TC because it's
Yep.
not used at the high school level? So We seem to be relying very heavily on the TC Reading Writers Project for instructional materials. And I would just love a little background on what do they do to vet the things that they suggest to districts? And also I know, full disclosure, I'm an alum from decades ago, but they have changed, the Reading Writing Project has changed their, their thinking a little bit in the past couple of years. And how is that reflected in what they're suggesting now?
What do you mean by the last couple of years changes?
I think so. Julie can speak to it probably more. The Lucy's ideas have shifted a little bit, and Lucy Calkins, who's the head of the Reading Writing Project.
In terms of authorship,
Yeah,
particularly,
Yeah.
yeah, they're looking for books with own voice authors. They're looking for more diverse and culturally relevant books. They're looking for those books that appeal to where kids can see themselves in the classroom and learn about experiences outside of their world, but within the world that the bigger world that they're living in.
But typically, when they curate a unit, New York City often is the testing site for a lot of those units. So
Right.
they're always in development. So they'll test them, they'll get a sense of what readers are engaged by. And they use some of the same resources that we spoke of in terms of award-winning text. They know authors personally. So there's a lot that goes into it before they arrive with us. I would say at the middle school level, one unit in particular that sort of reflects the authorship question that just came up is our contemporary classics unit that we have at the end of our 8th grade experience, and which does have some text with some mature content in it. But part of it is, our thinking is we save that for the very last unit at the middle school, thinking that our 8th graders are on the verge of the transition to the high school, and we want to give them that opportunity. So that's by design. Are there other questions about?
no,
Okay.
so it just seems, just the vast nature of TC within our district. Like, so you are all very confident in what they are suggesting to us.
Yeah, and as Julia said, and I have said, over time, it's not one size fits all, and some of the texts that they curate for some of our units aren't really that engaging for some of our kids, and some of those fall by the wayside. We keep the ones that they are engaged in, and we typically augment with some other types.
So I guess it's what you're saying. It's not a one size, we don't buy the shelf and that's all that's on the shelf. So,
Right.
like, we are augmenting with other stuff that our
That's right.
students are excited about.
Yep.
Thank you.
So at DHS, where, as I said, we do have book club units at the high school, but predominantly we have whole class novel experiences for our kids. And, you've all experienced this before, where a teacher chooses a text and the kids read it, and they read it incrementally and discuss it as they go along. At DHS, for our courses, what we try our best to do is balance the classic with the contemporary. A text that is a classic has a strong purchase of the hearts of our English teachers, and they tend to invest a lot of time and energy into the classics, but often it's the contemporary text that we feel like our kids are more engaged in because they see their world reflected in them. So we try to strike that balance as much as we can. At the high school, when teachers are requesting a new book, our process requires a conversation. So at the high school, almost every course is taught by multiple teachers. Just about everything has at least 4 or 5 teachers who teach sections of the same course. So we have a conversation with all of them to make sure that they're on board with it. And then they draft a rationale for why they think that this would be a good fit for the curriculum of that particular course. And then they identify any potential text that we might remove based upon, adding that particular one. And just, it's not like they're pulling books willy-nilly out of the air. They are typically reading reviews, they are looking at award-winning texts. And, I would just say, I'll pause here and just say that one of the, as someone who's taught in this district since 2003, one of the great privileges of working in this district is the responsiveness that we have enjoyed as teachers, because, there'll be an award-winning, Nobel Prize-winning novel that we are afforded the luxury of pulling into our curriculum, the next year. And so this is not something that's typical in a lot of districts in our country, and we all realize it, and we all, I think our kids benefit from that. And I think that, you know, they go off to college having experienced and been exposed to some powerful stories that are really current, and I think that that helps their transition there. Anyway, when making our decisions about purchasing text, I want to emphasize that our decisions are primarily on the literary and narrative elements of a given text. Those are the core of our conversations that we have with our kids in our classes, and we design lessons around them. And so if a text doesn't have that material, then it really isn't worth our time, and it's not going to create the kind of conversations that we really need our kids to have. So those are the primary focal points of what we're looking for in a text and adding it to our curriculum. And I'll just end this particular slide by saying that just like at the middle school, we certainly have examples of teachers requesting books that sometimes it just didn't seem like the timing was right, but ultimately it would have been, you know, something about the text, whether it was deemed inflammatory or too mature, that the mature sections would have outweighed the literary value of that given text, and those requests were denied. So unless there are questions about the process, I have some examples at the high school that I'll focus on at the end. And so I want to really draw our attention to three. The first two are the result of our work in English 9 Accelerated, and the last one is our work with English 10 Honors. And all of these book decisions were made 2 summers ago. So this is the second year that we have had students reading these texts in the class or as summer reading. So I'll just start with English 9 Accelerated. And in revising the curriculum for that course, the first semester, the focus is on coming of age stories and coming of age novels. And the conversation, in that conversation, there were a lot of potential texts and titles bandied about, but the teachers landed on Great Expectations, Charles Dickens, published in the mid-19th century. Can't get more classic than that. Story of Pip and his coming of age story. And, you know, as I said, we like to strike a balance between the classic and the contemporary. And so for second semester, the focus of the second semester of that class is trying to make sense of the external world and thinking about how myths and stories allow us to make sense of that world. And so the teachers landed on this book by esteemed author Salman Rushdie. I know you all know who I'm talking about. It's one of his recent publications, Haroun and the Sea of Stories. It's a magical realism allegory featuring an actual sea of stories that the characters are trying to protect throughout the text. So the author is very esteemed, and he's won every prize there is, and we've all heard of him even recently in the news because, you know, he has been a mouthpiece for anti-censorship efforts, you know, throughout his lifetime based on his publication of a book early in his career. But, you know, that aside, it's not because of that, and certainly we selected this before all the recent events happened, but you know, that was our nod to having a contemporary text to balance out the classic for that particular course. But the main focus is on how those books engaged in the essential questions and themes of the semesters, basically. For English 10 Honors, so the essential question for the course is, how do multiple perspectives and ways of seeing give shape to our experience of reading a text? Okay, so multiple perspectives is huge in this class, and it's something that they encounter in the other books in that class. So after a discussion, we decided to go with a book by a very young and up-and-coming author, Eric Nguyen. The book is Things We Lost the Water. You've all heard about it because it's kind of brought about a lot of criticism recently that we've seen at some of our Board of Ed meetings. And I would just say that the story is structured so that each chapter represents the point of view of one of the three main characters. So there's a different perspective basically brought about by every chapter. Now it's third person omniscient, so it's not like it's told in the first person, but we do get the vantage point of the main characters through each of the chapters. There's a powerful water motif. You can kind of maybe make sense of that based on the title. The other thing that our teachers liked about it, and it was a selling point, was that whenever we can in 10th grade, we try to opt for something that has more of a world perspective, because we'd like to have kids who are taking world studies in the history department have a chance to bring some of that learning into their classes in English. So when we can, we try our best to do it. And this story tracks the many years of a family that has to flee Vietnam in the fall of Saigon, and they wind up in New Orleans. And it's a story about the challenges that this family faces. This story has, recently we've seen that there is mature content in the book, and we have seen some aspects of that brought about in some of our Board of Ed meetings. I will say, I just want to point out, just so we're clear on this, this is something that we had in place, not this past summer, but the previous summer too. We didn't have any feedback whatsoever about the book the entire previous year. I heard nothing from any parent. I heard nothing from any student. And we have a unit at the beginning of the year that's designed around it. It's only been this year where we've heard some things. And just from my perspective, I've heard from one parent. I had one parent complaint, and I called that parent, and we had a very amicable conversation about it. I really appreciated the perspective of the parent, and I tried to explain the best as I could how I'm presenting it to you, how we made the choice. And, so that's where I'm coming from. There have been, some other folks at the Board of Ed meetings, being critical of this novel, and I get it. But it's not been levied directly at us. And all I can tell you is that if we eliminated every book in our curriculum at the high school with mature content, we'd have probably 5 books that remain. I have for you today, if you'd like, I came prepared with some passages from many books that you know and love that we teach at the high school that have extremely mature scenes that you can look at and just understand that those are scenes that all of our students are encountering all the time at the high school. They've encountered for many years. And, we don't focus our lessons around, let's look at the F-bombs in this particular passage. And, but we talk about perspective, point of view, and we try to channel it in the, sort of literary devices that are employed by the authors throughout the text. And, I think, you name it. And the book has been challenged or banned for these kind of passages. But, once again, we have been privileged to work in a district that has been very open-minded about these books over the years, deeming them as good for students to encounter before they head off to college. I will say, because I just want to say one last thing, and I really want to, I expect there'll be questions and comments about at least this book. I have a feeling. I mentioned there were multiple perspectives reflected in it. I will say that one thing is very clear about it is that one of the perspectives, one of the boys in the family in the story comes out as gay. Now, we don't have a lot of books at the high school that feature that sort of, development in a character. So that's new. And, I would imagine that maybe less the kinds of passages that parents have pointed out at some of the board members at the board meetings. But, I have a feeling that dimension is part of the reason, or maybe a large part of the reason why there is some challenges that have been made about the book. I just want to make sure that was clear so that we're all on the same page. And I welcome any questions that you might have about any of these things that I've been going at.
Quick ones. Francis, do you know how many parents reached out to the teachers of 10th grade honors English or Mrs. Dunn?
I can't speak for Mrs. Dunn, but
Okay.
she probably, there's
probably
no doubt she would have
contacted you.
alerted me
Right.
if she had heard from someone. And the teachers would have all, anytime any criticism is levied about one of our instructional resources or one of the novels, all roads will lead back to me eventually. So I have heard nothing from our teachers on this.
And in general, that would be the recommendation, right? If a parent has a concern about an instructional material, to reach out to a teacher as the starting place?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, look, I don't, certainly the way we normally do things as department chairs, if a parent has an objection about something happening in a classroom for their particular student, then typically we want them to reach out to the teacher to have that conversation first. Although, as you might guess, many parents reach out to me directly and I try to facilitate that conversation, and then they might wind up coming back to me. When it comes to, this kind of resource, because it's used for all the sections of a given course, I think that makes sense that they would reach out to me.
Understood. Thanks.
And just to build on that, so some of the emails that the board has received about this book have come from children or parents of younger children that you may not have a 10th grade honors student or a student at the high school yet. If those parents, if younger parents are concerned, you're welcome, you are happy to chat to them as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And listen, it's not, our teachers are well aware, the entire department is well aware of the criticisms that have been levied about this book. And I want you to know that, these books are not etched in stone. It's very fluid. We change. I can't think of a year that's gone by that we haven't made a couple changes in summer reading. And none of our books have a permanent status at the high school. And we always take these things into consideration, and we will certainly continue to have conversations about it. So I don't, we're not trying to inflame the community with any of our book selections. We're doing things that we think are in the best interest of our students.
Okay, so I have a couple comments. One, I don't have a dog in this fight. I have a senior and I have a son who goes to private school. So, two, I have spoken to a lot of parents about this book, and I have suggested they reach out to the board as a whole or reach out to administration. And often, whether it's true or not, they are afraid of repercussions for their children. So that is a shame. Three, in all the conversations I have had, nobody has ever said anything about the boy being gay. Nobody cares about that.
Okay.
It is about the over-sexualization. They could care less whether that is boy, girl, boy, girl. So to assume that's what it is offensive.
But I'm not assuming that's the case. I just want to bring that as a possibility. So, but I understand.
Can I ask for a clarification? Can you help me understand what the fear of repercussions means? What is it like in the English department that something bad will happen to them?
They're afraid their kid's going to get a bad grade. Everyone's trying, everyone is afraid that their kid is going to, I have heard it so many times, not just about English, about everything. I don't want to, say anything because I'm afraid my kid's now. I have said, listen, I have been vocal for years, right? Clearly, my daughter has never had any repercussions, right? And I have said that it's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is a fear that people have that is false.
I've never heard it about academics. I'm sorry. That's
Oh,
why I
no?
asked.
Oh,
I've
yeah,
never-
yeah,
it's
yeah.
never
All the
come to
time,
my
all the time.
attention.
I've heard it so many times, and I've always told them that it's absurd. Clearly, as we know, my daughter is.
Well, and obviously we, as Sarah just pointed out, a number of the complaints that we have heard come from people who don't even have students in the high school and or in this course. So those individuals also fear repercussions to their students academically?
Yeah, and they also, people are also, they look at one thing and they look at, what's happening elsewhere. And we know how long things take in schools, right? How long did it take to get a, AP in English, right? Second AP, like these things take forever. I mean, we're still talking about, accelerating math for 20 years, right? Things take a really long time to move. So people with young students do look at high school and think, well, what's going to be there when my kid gets there? Or how long is it going to take to change?
That's very illuminating.
It's also important to point out that the board level is not where specific book or instructional issues, where concerns with those should be directed. Like the board as a whole doesn't have, we will not say to Mr. Janowsko, you can't use this book anymore. That's not our purview. So if parents in the district are having issues or have concerns or questions, they need to go to the teachers and the administrators in charge. We're happy to hear those concerns, but we can't act on those concerns.
Yeah, I would invite, that to happen. And I know it is happening on a sort of central services kind of level. But yeah, I mean, look, we want to have feedback on this. I will echo what you said about parents having a fear. I mean, this is just across the board. It's not about this particular book or any issue, but I'm sure Mr. Keeler will say the same. I mean, for any circumstance that a parent brings to a department chair, there is almost always some line about, I'm hesitant to do this because I don't want to have any reprisals or whatever. We do our best to, allay those fears because, I'll just say that, people get into the teaching profession because they want to help and support students and not, take out their vengeance upon them. So, so that part, that's very valid. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. But, I'll just say that, I've given you a sense of what we do when we make our book selections. We're doing our best. And we're doing our best to, put our kids in a position to learn and have conversations and read books that we value.
Do we think it would be valuable to share or make available what you referenced, examples from other well-known and widely accepted books used for teaching that also include?
Yeah, I mean,
similar.
I'll just say that I want to look. I'll just say if people want to have a conversation with me about the book, I want to make sure that they've read the book.
Right.
And I think if you read the book, there are some scenes that have not been brought about or have been focused on in some of the emails that have been sent to the district that we can have conversations about. But I think that if you think, pretty much any of the core classic texts that you would expect that we would do in high school, on my list, Catcher in the Rye, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, The Things They Carry, The Outsiders, The Glass Castle, Slaughterhouse-Five, Death of a Salesman, Grapes of Wrath, Their Eyes Are Watching God, Romeo and Juliet. Let me just tell you, it's really hard for teachers to have a unit on Romeo and Juliet where sex doesn't come up because it's available in the entire play. So I'm just saying that there's not a scene, but there isn't really a scene in Things We Lost in the Water either. So anyway, look, is this the first time we've had a book challenged? No. Is this the last time? It won't be. What I am very pleased by, if I can just make a shout out here, is that we redid our English 10 curriculum over the summer, and we're concluding right now a unit on banned books. And so just about every book on this list has been banned over the course of time in America for one reason or another, because the community didn't find them viable or were offended by some element of them. And it's been eye-opening for our kids because basically the books that they're reading for an independent selection in that unit are classics, but they've been banned. And so it gives them a chance to read something they've always heard about and know that it was banned, and they're reading it through the lens of, why did this book get banned? And so the assessment that the kids are doing at the end of the unit is a very authentic one, I think, is that they are writing a letter to our superintendent, either defending the book or advocating that the book is banned. So they have a chance to do that with what I think is a pretty authentic task. And our superintendent has been gracious enough to read at least some of the selections culled by our teachers, and he will be giving them feedback on it. So who knows, maybe the videotape of this meeting will be a piece of that unit next year. I don't know. All I'll say is that, when teachers make book selections, and at the high school, there is nothing more vital for the teachers than the book selections that they make that are the basis of the units in our high school. And to the high school teachers, these books, all the books that they teach have a sacred quality to them that they really probably don't have for us. I include myself among them, the teachers of the high school, that is, who find them sacred. And certainly we try our best to explain to the students why we find these to be great works of literature. But, we like to think of them as powerful and, life-affirming and life-changing kind of texts that the kids read. And so anytime we have discussions about this and about elements of literature, part of us, we don't, look, I'm not saying that we're happy that there's been a lot of criticism directed at this particular book, but we're talking about a book, and that's not a bad thing,
So thank you. I think one of the things we would all agree, our town would agree, that one of our biggest assets next to our students, and the biggest difference that will make a child's life in terms of learning, is the actual teacher in the classroom. So the quality of our teachers, the capacity of our teachers, the thoughtfulness of our teachers, the intelligence of our teachers, and the leaders you see this morning, that's something that all of us on the board and everyone actually really, really supports. So I just want to reassure people that the selection of these, as you can see today, right, and the thoughtfulness of the presentation, that there's a lot of thought and discourse that goes into the selection of the books. I would also say they're not mutually exclusive. Like, we're not tone deaf, and neither, I say that very respectfully, and our department chairs, our leaders aren't either. Right? It's not as if whether we have had discourse over selection of social studies materials with Keith or Francis, English materials, we'll always, even if it's a discipline issue, right? And let's say we didn't agree, we would also always sit down professionally and in a current way reflect upon the feedback that we're hearing. I would say that one of the tenets of the community could be that they're afraid of what would happen to their student or whatever that means, right? I don't think that's unreal, an unreal sentiment. But it's also a culture that I think we have to continue to work at, because otherwise it just swirls. And the professionals who are actually delivering the content don't have a chance to actually share their perspective. And it may not be a mutually agreed outcome to that, but minimally they have to have the opportunity to do that. And anytime we can continue to support a culture where, based on trust, these are professional people, right? We're in the profession because we care about kids. We're not going to, like, the idea of retribution and so on and so forth. I understand it comes up. I understand it's a real thing, but anything that collectively we can do to continue to promote that sense of trust with our staff. It's not that there should be any disagreements or otherwise. You hear that today people are open to that discourse. I would just continue to encourage that where we can, because it's the best way to really resolve something and actually get to facts. And if there's a difference between those, then that's fine. And if there's not, maybe there can be a resolution. But I think that today's discussion actually is very important, and it's a positive experience to have actually in this discourse.
Can I just add one thing, just because I don't want anyone leaving offended, because leaving meetings offended is never a good way to end any meeting, and we still have some more to go. The Francis's comment, there was an article in Ed Week a couple of weeks ago regarding critique of books right now, and the national critique that's happening does happen to be books with LGBTQIA plus characters and things related to immigration. So that's kind of part of a national thing that's happening. And this book happens to be both of them. So we're just naming that. And I also do want to name, because we're really talking, I think there's less than 10 people that we've heard from collectively, but among the 10, one person did write that I don't want this title selected or any other genderqueer books for kids. So that is part of it's probably 6. Yeah. And that was coupled, I'm going to say it, with my name should not be selecting books. And I hope you heard today, and for the record, Chris Tranberg does not sit and select books. This is a team of highly competent people. And from Jacqueline's presentation to looking at student art, it felt so good to start this meeting to hear the talents of our staff talk about the thought that goes into all of these processes. And I will echo too, I know that there's a feeling, every place I work, there's a feeling of retribution when you come to try to engage in these conversations. But like Dr. Hadley said, this is a group of professionals who want what's best for kids. Every one of us, every single day in this town, no matter where we are on any spectrum, want what is best for kids. It's like a shared goal we have. And if we can center ourselves on that in every conversation we have, we'd be in a different place most of the time.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I will maybe start by saying that a small shout out to Jacqueline and the art department for beautifying our buildings too. I feel like I kind of wish that we could hang history papers around the building the same way and it would have the same impact, but I don't know that it would. So I'm going to talk about the selection of resources that we use on the history side of things, and the closest thing to our a whole class novel is really the textbook selection process that we might go through, the textbooks that we would use. When we're selecting a textbook, we start really by identifying a need, and that need can come from a number of different places. It could be that we have a text that's outdated, or there's new scholarship in the field, new research. Recently, in the last few years, we replaced our psychology elective textbook. The science in there just wasn't up to date and really needed to be renewed. We're in the process for this coming budget that we'll be submitting very soon, looking at AP. We've finished really looking at AP European history textbooks. And so that came about, the book that we had was older. We wanted to make sure that we had something that was up to date. Standards and frameworks change over time, and that can also be a really important driver of when we need to look for a textbook. So once we've identified that need, then we have to gather samples. And there are a number of publishers who will send us things freely and send us samples unsolicited. Other times we'll reach out and say, here's the class, here's the topic. Do you have anything that might be available that we could look through? There are some texts that are really widely published for particular areas. Those we would certainly ask for. We also can work with our other DERG and regional colleagues. So next week I have an opportunity to attend a social studies department chair or director meeting at CES, and that's a great place just to exchange ideas. I can ask, this is the text that I'm looking for. This is the class that I'm looking for. Do any of you have any suggestions that I should look through? And that's a really helpful group to work with as well. And anytime you attend professional conferences, there's always lots that's available there. The companies, I think, are pretty quick to send us samples and also give us online text that we can review as well. So once we actually get our collective group, what we're going to start by doing is really looking to see how aligned is the content of the textbook with what we really need it to be. I think I heard it said before by one of my colleagues that, these books don't drive the curriculum, but they serve to support what we're doing. And so that's really the first important question we ask is the content aligned? We look to see, is the text rigorous and complex, but also making sure that it's not too rigorous or too complex. It has to be appropriately accessible for the students who are going to be in that class. And then also, especially now, more so than before, I think, we have to consider things like, is there an online version? Do we want the online version? What does that look like? Are there other supplemental resources that might be really useful for our classes? Do we need those? What's the cost of it? Once we go through this whole process, we ultimately land on the text that we want. It gets submitted in our budget request and makes its way through the budget process, and then we purchase as the budget rolls over at the end of June into July every year and gets ready for the next school year. One of the other kind of main sources that students will look through when they're taking history classes are, we might call like student sources. So there are going to be things that we ask students to go out and find and look for. It's important to note, though, that this is a responsibility that is gradually turned over to students in grades 6 through 12. So we don't start in grade 6 by saying, let's start Googling and see what we can find. We're really careful about how we do this. A lot of the material that you find in 6th and 7th grade and 8th grade tends to be very curated. So here is a pool that we want you to look through to find the information that you might need. We're trying to be careful that students have something that's readable and accessible, but also content appropriate for the age group that we're working with. When you move into like the high school, that's where you might find, like in a 9th or 10th grade research paper, students are really being encouraged to go out and find additional sources, see what they can discover on their own. Written into our vision of the graduate is the competency of curiosity. And so we want nothing more than students who, because of the work that we're doing in class, say, I actually was looking this up on my own and I found this really interesting and I want to know more about this. So we are almost always going to encourage that. The times where we're going to really pull back and ask students not to seek additional input is when the assignment is such that part of it is designed to assess how students read and understand material. So a good example would be like in a document-based question in a DBQ that we would give in a history class. Those assignments, we ask students not to go out and seek additional input because we're really trying to see, can you read and interpret the chart, the map, the primary source, the political cartoon, whatever it might be. So those are the times where we would really say, stick with what we're giving you right now. When students are turned loose or eventually turned loose to do this, it's only after they've really been taught to evaluate sources, and I've given you some sample questions on the right side of the slideshow here. These are some of the things that they have to consider. Is this source current? Is it reliable? Who is the author? Where does it come from? What's the purpose? What's the perspective? These are things that over time we start even in 6th and 7th grade, even though they're not going out and seeking a lot on their own. We're starting to build that competency early on so that they have the ability to do it as they mature through the grades. One of our other main readings that we work with students on, particularly in our history classes, is primary sources. This is what Chris had mentioned before, the distinction between primary and secondary. In the social studies world, when we're talking about primary sources, we're talking about artifacts that were produced in a specific time period, the time period that we're studying. Oftentimes it's pieces of writing, but it doesn't have to be necessarily. These are really the basis for our history classes. They are, even if we're not reading all of them, which would be impossible in our classes, the secondary source, the article, the documentary, the textbook is based on somebody's reading of those primary sources. So we do want to give students the opportunity to explore them. They're incredibly interesting, they grab attention, and they are really what allows us to explore critical thinking and push critical thinking with students. You really can't have even a text, a primary source that presents as unbiased or seems unbiased, has some degree of bias in it by virtue of what was included, what was not included, what was the order, how were things said. I mean, to name just a few. So it's really important that students learn over time to explore these primary sources and understand a lot of those same questions. Who wrote this? Why did they write it? Who did they think was going, if it was a piece of writing, who did they think was going to be able to read this? Why would they have said what they did? And when we really start to explore that, that's where we're able to develop a lot of nuanced thinking. Going beyond just the simple, what did the author say, is where our classes really get interesting. And that level of thought is what we're pushing students to do. So the primary sources are incredibly important. We also try to be really careful that we vet these for students as well. They have to be something that is appropriate for their age and the content that's being presented. They also have to be relevant. There are plenty of things that I've found over the years that I felt like really did a wonderful job of making a point or illustrating some idea or trend in history, But the problem was that the text was way too hard or way too long or not practical to use with students. And so in those cases, we simply wouldn't use them. So those are some of the things that we tend to go through and think about as we're working with students on this. And again, I'll just close the primary source section by saying, this is really one of the main areas that we work to teach students to think independently, to be critical consumers of information. And although we may do this oftentimes in the context of historical pieces, it will serve them very, very well in their lives where there is just so much information that they're exposed to. And lastly, as teachers, as we're trying to figure out where do we go to find this information for students? How are we going to incorporate readings into our classes? We have a variety of places that we can turn, that we can work collectively. Some of these, like the national awards, are more fitting for my English counterpart here. But in terms of what the district uses, we have library databases that are incredibly useful. These are helpful to teachers to find information, but they're also helpful for us to direct students to. And we have some really outstanding databases that we have access to. There are other district resources. They vary a little bit from school to school, depending on the age of the students, but these provide us with article-like article, kind of periodical type publications that are really useful and really can illustrate points well for us. In terms of web resources, there is so much that's been digitized over the years in the world of history. So for a lot of colleges or historical societies, they have really large digitization projects. And so there's so much that's available right now. To name a couple, there's the National Archives is a really wonderful resource for us. There are modern and ancient history source books that are out of Fordham University. There's many places that we can go, and we employ the same strategies we teach our students. Where is it coming from? Who's the author? Why was it published? And we have to hold ourselves to that same standard that we expect our students to use when they're doing work for us. Lastly, in terms of current events, this is probably one of the areas where I think students really look to their social studies teachers. When something happens in the world, they often look to us first. And it's interesting now because something can happen over lunch. And particularly at the high school, students will have access to their phones really easily, and there may be these alerts that are going off letting them know this breaking news, this is going on in the world or nationally. And so when that happens, we take that responsibility of dealing with what's going on in the world very seriously. And I think the way that we tend to approach this is really to start by answering students' questions, because oftentimes they come in just having questions to say, well, why and what is that? Who is this person? And so we try to give them some basic information in the moment, and we'll try to field some of their questions. And some of them we have to say, that's something we should really explore. I'm not really sure about that. We try to be responsive when things happen that are relevant to our curriculum. And again, there's a whole variety of places that you can turn to this. Some of us were talking at the outset of this meeting how great podcasts can be. There are certainly digital texts that we can look at, articles from current news organizations. There are written ones, there are short video clips. Some of those can be useful to use with students. We vet them, and we also share a lot. There's a lot of collaboration in the context of current events and throughout everything I've just talked about. One of the strengths, one of the things that I have the pleasure of talking about when we're hiring candidates is typically they'll ask, well, what is the department like? And I have an opportunity to sing their praises and say, this is a really talented group of teachers who take their jobs very seriously, who care for the disciplines that we teach and really want to bring that to life for students. And that comes through in all of the formal and informal ways that we collaborate and work together. So I think that brings it to a close for me.
Thank you.
I'm happy
Mr.
to answer any questions that you all might have.
Just similar to what we talked about with Mr. Josko, when people have concerns about whether it's a document passed out in class or a resource used, do you want to be that person? Should they go to the classroom teacher? What do you suggest?
So my door is always open. My email is always open. My phone is always open. I'm happy to be contacted. I often think that contacting the teacher first is best. I just think they're going to be able to really give a sense of, here's what we were doing in class, here's why we're using it. I certainly can do the same thing, but I feel like it fosters a good relationship between parent and student. I think with what Ms. Worm was saying earlier, I hear that a lot when parents do talk to me as well, that they're concerned that they, can you leave my child's name out of this? That I want to talk to you about X. I try to reassure them as much as I can that, as Dr. Chamberg said, nobody gets into this profession because we're eventually wanting to be out for vengeance. We get into this because we want to help our students and help them to grow. And I look at all of this parent interaction as parents who want the best for their kids and have a concern in some form or another that their kids get good experiences and that they have a helpful time in school. And I can very much appreciate that, being a parent of 3 myself. So I welcome it, but I would say initially I would reach out to the teacher. If that feels unresolved or you didn't get it didn't help, then by all means reach out to me. And if more comfortable, then my door, email, and phone are open.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one, and I definitely learned something today, but for both of you, thank you for the very thorough presentations. Mr. Janosko, we got very focused on yours very quickly. So I did want to back up and say it's very helpful. And I look at the curriculum today and I'm so appreciative of how far it's come from when I'm pretty sure I read Charles Dickens year after year after year when I was in high school. So it's nice to see how contemporized or well balanced things are today. I was just curious for the both of you, has the process changed much in how things are selected? And if so, what has led to that? And if not, then it hasn't.
In some ways, it hasn't changed much. In some ways, it's changed tremendously. So I'll get at how it hasn't changed. And as someone who has the vantage point of being in this district since 2003, the way we put forward book requests for the high school, I can only really speak to the high school, I didn't do the middle school in those days. It typically comes at the end of the year when there is a time crunch. And from my vantage point, we have to go through the process fairly quickly when making decisions, because ultimately we want to get the books in the kids' hands come September, and that doesn't happen overnight. And there's a lot of books that we wind up ordering, not just new books, but predominantly it's just replacement texts for ones that we've lost or were wrecked from the previous year. So just as an aside, I do think that I could tell you that we're going to have a conversation at the high school about streamlining that process. And we're going to do some reflecting on when we do certain things, because, as much as I think it's important that we, make these decisions based upon the curriculum, I empathize, I get what the parent response to a book like this, but if they don't have the context of what we have in the other books that kids are reading, and part of the reason why is because they've heard the titles of these books so many times over the courses of their lives, or maybe even they read and forgot that these books also have passages in them that if I isolated just those passages, any parent could isolate those passages, send emails to Dr. Adley and Dr. Tranberg, and we could be looking at removing any book from our curriculum. I think the thing that's changed, if I go back 2 years, when in the spring when we all had the pleasure of leaving the building for the pandemic, that was also a year. You understand me? That was also a year where Mr. Keeler and I, that was in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and we had students, both past and present, they facilitated it, but we joined them for meetings on ways through which we could make our curriculum more contemporary and connected to the world today. So those are present students that we had and alumni who were frustrated by what we already have in place because we're not having the conversations that they thought were important in the world. The following year, I had a group of students, this is 2021, I had a group of students that basically had a club where they were studying the curriculum of the English department of high school, and they were critical of how we weren't progressive enough for those. These are students now, and we had meetings with them over the course of the year. We tried to show them that, these are the writers that we talked about. We kind of did a similar thing to what we're doing today with students. So we hear things from both sides of the, conversation, the national conversation about which books are most appropriate for our schools. So I would say there's a heightened awareness of, the book selections that we're making. But I want to say that this isn't easy when it feels like we have voices from two sides of extreme poles criticizing the choices that we're making, and it's really hard to walk that midpoint line and make it all come out right. So, so that's a little bit of context to what we're going through right now.
I think what I would say is that we, as a department, with some of the smaller sources that we use, we really try to be, meaning not like the textbooks, which are set and around for years. We really try to hold ourselves to that, as I said, the same standard that we hold our students to make sure that, we're checking to see where did it come from, who's the author, what's the point of view being expressed, what's the relevance, perhaps most importantly, what are we doing with it? It's hard to avoid that exposure to bias, so it's important to name it and bring it out so that we can understand it. So I guess I don't know that anything has had a dramatic change as much as that has become more of a focal point of our discussions as we're in PLCs and department meetings on PD days, and we have collaborative time and we're looking at sources and the work the material that we use with students. That's something that I think we talk about more now, I would say. It's not to say that we didn't before, that we didn't care before, but it's something that is maybe more in the forefront of our thinking, I would say. And I think the consistency is always maybe what's the same is making sure that we're finding resources for students that are appropriate for their age with the content that we're exposing them to, as well as giving them an opportunity to develop the skills that are essential and that we teach in our classes.
So it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that the inputs and the variables have maybe grown in complexity and number, but your process for sorting through all of that information and the way that you work through it has remained mostly the same. Is that a fair characterization?
For us, I think that's quite fair.
Okay.
And, but I would say, I love the way you put it. And with that rise of complexity, I think to meet the challenge, we're going to have to figure out a way to have more steps of our process so that we can, I'm not saying meet complexity with more complexity just for complexity's sake, but I do think we have to respond by reassessing how we do things.
Yeah, we are looking at all of those processes right now. And one of the big steps we're taking is a more interdisciplinary approach, because you often get feedback from other colleagues not in your department area who come in with the lens that can be really helpful in making those decisions. So that's the work of our curriculum leadership team this year.
And I think I always like to true back up to our vision, which is preparing all students today to thrive in a changing world tomorrow. And it sounds to me, from what you said today, that you're doing that in a very thoughtful way and that you're thinking hard about what our students will need when we launch them into the real world after they graduate. So I think, thank you for being thoughtful from Julie all the way up. Like it's clear that it's being done not willy-nilly.
Thank you.
Dr. Ellie, you want to add anything? Or?
No, I want to thank them for their candid discourse and for their leadership. This is, again, we recognize the leadership, we recognize the talent of our teachers. This is a time where you lean into that. You can't just be selective around it. And but they're also, again, very inclusive in what their thoughts are and so on.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here and for sharing your thoughts.
Can I just share one other thing before, just because you brought up PC, I just want to praise you just of the development for the pre-K to reading programs from the state. There were 6 programs that were selected. The initial list doesn't have TC on it. As you know, we supplement our programs with Heckerty and foundations and so on. They're developing a waiver process for districts. There's many districts all around us and further across the state that use TC. So they're developing a waiver process, and I'll fill the board in a little bit more, but we'll be participating in that.
Thank you. Thanks. And we move on to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience?
Good morning. Mr. Sini has his hand
Oh,
raised.
sorry, I can't see that.
Do you want to jump in the room?
Yeah, should we, well, we'll let John, go ahead, John.
I didn't expect special treatment, but thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go ahead.
So I appreciate it. I just wanted to log in appreciative comments as well. I think when we envisioned this committee, we wanted to see, transparency of discussions around curriculum like this. And I just, applaud us all for having them. And again, just a heartfelt thanks, getting deep into the content this morning and really having that conversation that I think a lot of parents will appreciate as we move this committee forward.
Thanks, Jeff.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Ritchie. I live at 16 Stony Brook Road South. I am the co-chair of the Council for Darien School Parents, but these comments are my own. Again, they are my own comments. Thank you. I just want to thank the Darien Board of Education for their passion and dedication to educating our children. I thank you for the hard work. I thank Dr. Adley for your leadership. And I want to thank Chris and Francis and Keith and Julie and also Jacqueline for your leadership. I want to thank you for challenging our children. I want to thank you for your passion for education, your thoughtful approach. I appreciate it. My son is, in full disclosure, he's a 9th grader and he's reading Great Expectations right now, and he is loving it. And I am loving being part of that process with him and going back in time and revisiting a classic that I loved. But I am also appreciative of the contemporary choices that you have, because it is exposing our children to different perspectives and current perspectives in our world. And also, we just wrote a great essay about Alexander the Great. So, in that Western Civ class that we all dread. But I just want to really say how grateful I am as a parent for all of you, because of you, our schools are fantastic and great and the top in the state. And I just want you to know that I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Are there any other hands, Michelle?
There are no raised hands.
Okay, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, almost.
All right.